Today, FDA approvals in follicular lymphoma and renal cell carcinoma, a breakthrough therapy designation in multiple myeloma, promising combination results in a lung cancer trial, and a European approval in pediatric chronic myeloid leukemia. Welcome to Enclave News Network. I'm Gina Columbus. The FDA has approved obinutuzumab in combination with chemotherapy, followed by obinutuzumab alone for the first-line treatment of patients with advanced follicular lymphoma. The indication is for patients with stage 2 bulky 3 or 4 disease. The approval is based on data from the international phase 3 Gallium study, in which combining obinutuzumab with chemotherapy in the first-line setting reduced the risk of disease progression or death by 28% versus rituximab plus chemotherapy in patients with follicular lymphoma. Additional findings showed that at a median follow-up of 41.1 months, the hazard ratio for progression-free survival by investigator assessment was 0.68. Per independent review, the HR for PFS was 0.72. The median PFS has not been reached yet in either treatment arm. The overall response rate was 91% in the obinutuzumab arm and 88% in the control arm. Complete remission rates were 28% and 27% respectively. In renal cell carcinoma, the FDA has approved sunitinib for use as an adjuvant therapy in patients who have received nephrectomy and are high risk for recurrence. The agency approved sunitinib for this indication despite a 6-6 split vote on the potential approval from its Oncologic Drugs Advisory Committee in September. The approval is based on results from the phase 3 S-TRACK trial, in which adjuvant sunitinib prolonged disease-free survival by 1.2 years compared with placebo following nephrectomy for patients with high-risk clear cell RCC. After a median follow-up of 5.4 years, the median DFS was 6.8 years in the sunitinib arm versus 5.6 years with placebo. In higher-risk patients, the median DFS was 6.2 versus 4 years for sunitinib and placebo, respectively. Grade 3-4 adverse events were experienced by 63.4% of patients in the sunitinib group, compared with 21.7% in the placebo arm. After 3 years, 64.9% of those in the sunitinib group were alive and remained disease-free, compared with 59.5% in the placebo arm. At 5 years, the DFS rate was 59.3% with sunitinib versus 51.3% for placebo. Median overall survival findings were not yet mature at the time of the analysis. However, the hazard ratio between the two arms for survival was 1.01. The FDA has granted BB2121 a breakthrough therapy designation for previously treated patients with relapsed refractory multiple myeloma. In a press release, the companies developing BB2121, Celgene Corporation and Bluebird Bio, reported that the investigational agent had also been awarded priority medicines eligibility by the European Medicines Agency. BB2121 is an anti-B-cell maturation antigen, chimeric antigen receptor T-cell therapy. The regulatory decisions were based on preliminary clinical data from the ongoing Phase 1 CRB-401 study. The companies did not release any updated data, but noted that updating findings would be presented at the 2017 ASH annual meeting. Early results presented in June 2017 showed that 75% of patients receiving the treatment demonstrated a very good partial response or better, and 27% had a complete response. The overall response across all dose levels was 89%. The median time to first response was 31 days, and the median time to best response was 50.5 days. The duration of response was 134 days and longer. In non-small cell lung cancer, the addition of atezolizumab to bevacizumab, carboplatin, and paclitaxel was found to delay progression or death versus bevacizumab and chemotherapy alone for patients with advanced non-squamous disease. The top-line findings were from the randomized Phase 3 IMpower 150 trial. Data from the interim analysis of the trial are being presented in December at the ESMO Immuno-Oncology Congress, according to Roche, the manufacturer of both agents. The co-primary endpoints for the IMpower 150 study were progression-free survival and overall survival. Although exact numbers have not yet been released, Roche called the reduction in progression or death with the addition of atezolizumab clinically meaningful, adding that at the interim analysis, Data for overall survival were not yet mature, but are encouraging. Additionally, the company has initiated discussions with the FDA and EMA regarding regulatory approval. The European Commission has approved nilotinib for the treatment of pediatric patients with Philadelphia chromosome-positive chronic myeloid leukemia in the chronic phase, both in the frontline setting and for those with resistance or intolerance to prior therapy that includes imatinib. The decision follows a positive opinion from the European Medicines Agency's Committee for Medicinal Products for Human Use, which was issued on September 14th. The second-generation tyrosine kinase inhibitor is now approved for these indications in all EU member states. The agency based the decision on 2 prospective studies, which were part of a formal pediatric investigation plan of nilotinib in children with Ph-positive CML-CP. The rate of major molecular response in patients with newly diagnosed CML was 60% at 12 cycles. 15 patients achieved MMR. The MMR rate at 12 cycles was 40.9% in previously treated patients, comprising 18 patients who achieved MMR. By cycle 12, the cumulative MMR rates were 64% and 47.7% among the newly diagnosed and previously treated patients, respectively. This week, we sat down with Dr. Debu Tripathi of the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center to discuss how CDK4/6 inhibitors are changing the treatment landscape of breast cancer.
Well, the CDK4/6 inhibitors have really made a big difference in the management of hormone receptor positive breast cancer, which is 70% of all the breast cancers, not only in the first line, but in the second line therapy. So the results have consistently shown that we are doubling time to disease progression when we combine it with standard hormonal therapy. Now, the data so far show that these are very well tolerated drugs in general. There was always some concern that when we introduce biologics that we may now have a whole new set of side effects to deal with. And there are some side effects, but for the most part they're minor. And we're now finding, as we're getting used to them in practice, that most of our patients we are now putting on these agents. The big question is there a group of patients that you shouldn't put on it? Is there anybody that maybe might not benefit from a doubling in disease-free survival? Our feeling is that even though an overall survival benefit has not yet been demonstrated, and that's in part because the trials weren't designed to pick up a survival benefit, but the other thing we have to look at is, are we delaying the need for additional therapies, especially chemotherapy, which is associated with more side effects than any hormonal therapy. So I would say that for the most part, at least in our practice, a vast majority of our patients are receiving CDK4/6 inhibitors in first line, and if they haven't received it in first line, they're receiving it in second line therapy. The CDK4/6 inhibitors have been tested for many years, and the one that was first to enter in clinical trials was palbociclib. And the first trial to be reported was in the first-line setting in combination with the aromatase inhibitor letrozole. And both the pilot study and ultimately the larger phase 2 study then showed a clear benefit in disease-free survival. Subsequently, there was a second-line therapy with fulvestrant plus or minus palbociclib. So palbociclib is indicated both in first-line therapy with an aromatase inhibitor or second-line therapy with fulvestrant. The next one to be approved and tested was ribociclib, and that one was tested first in the first-line setting, again with letrozole plus or minus ribociclib, again showing comparable benefits, and was subsequently approved for that. Abemaciclib is a little bit different. It's the activity, it's a CDK4/6 inhibitor like the others, but it has some activity against the other CDKs. It has a slightly different toxicity profile. And the first trial with abemaciclib was actually reported in refractory disease, patients who had received multiple therapies, again hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative, and it was tested as a single agent without hormonal therapy, and it showed activity. And then shortly after that, the second-line trial was reported, the Monarch 2, which was fulvestrant plus or minus abemaciclib. So that indication, just at the end of last month, the end of September, was for refractory hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative disease as a single agent, but also in combination with fulvestrant in second-line therapy. The first-line therapy was just recently presented at ESMO, but the FDA label doesn't cover that yet.
That's all for today. Thank you for watching Enclave News Network. I'm Gina Columbus.